The rain had been falling for 3 days when Miss Honora Bramwell was summoned to the library at Ravenshaw, and she went with her hem already dark to the knee, because the corridor from the west wing leaked in weather like this, and no one had thought to send her by the covered way. She had not been given a candle either. She carried her own, cupped against the draught, and the flame threw her shadow long along the wainscot as she walked. A broad shadow, made broader still by the plain gray stuff of her gown and the shawl she had drawn tight against the cold. She had learned long ago not to hurry down these halls. Hurrying made one look eager, and looking eager, in a house like this one, was the beginning of a great many small humiliations. At the library door she paused, and set the candle down on the console table, and pressed her palm flat to the wood. And she breathed once, deeply, as she had trained herself to breathe, and then she knocked. "Come." The voice was low and unhurried, and made of the same weather as the house. She went in. The Duke of Ravenshaw stood at the window, with his back to her, one hand braced on the frame, the other holding a folded paper by the corner as though it had bitten him. He did not turn. The fire behind him was low. It had been low for a long time, from the look of the ash. Honora had noticed, in the 6 weeks she had been in this house, that the fires at Ravenshaw were always low. The house counted its candles as though each one were an argument it did not wish to have. She had thought, more than once, that a house could reveal a man more truly than his face, and that this house, cold and hoarding and half in mourning, was telling her something its master would not. "You sent for me, your grace." "I sent for the governess," he said, still not turning. "You are her." "I am." "Sit." There was one chair. She sat. He turned then, and she saw him properly in the low firelight, tall and severe and very tired, the fine bones of his face made harder by a jaw that had not been relaxed in a great while. She had heard, before she came here, that the Duke of Ravenshaw was cold. She had heard he was proud. She had heard from the woman in Yorkshire, who had recommended her for the post out of pity, that he had loathed his late wife's sister on sight, and had loathed the governess before her, within an hour, and that she, Honora, would do well to keep her head down and her mouth closed, and her opinions to herself, because a poor gentlewoman with opinions was a luxury no household could afford. She had kept her opinions to herself. She had kept her head down. The Duke had, so far as she could tell, loathed her none the less, steadily, distantly, the way one loathes a piece of furniture in a room one has been forced to inherit. He had spoken to her 3 times in 6 weeks. Each time it had been to correct her. Now, he set the folded paper on the desk between them and rested 2 fingers on it and said, "Read it." She read it. It was a marriage contract. Her name was on it, in a clerk's tidy hand. Honora Elizabeth Bramwell, spinster, of the parish of St. Botolph. His name was there too. The date left blank, the terms not blank at all. She read it a second time to be sure she had not invented it, and then she folded her hands in her lap, and looked up and said quite calmly, "No." He had not been expecting that. She saw it in the flicker at the corner of his mouth. Not surprise, quite, but the small adjustment of a man who has misread a room. He noticed things, this Duke. She had observed it. He noticed the boot boy's limp. He noticed which of the maids had been crying. He had once at breakfast stopped a footman mid-pour, because the footman's hand was shaking, and told him quietly to sit down, and the footman had sat, and no one had spoken of it again. He noticed everything. This man, except apparently the woman he had just decided to marry. "You have not," he said, "asked why." "I have not agreed to answer why." "Before I answer anything, your grace, you will tell me the truth. All of it. I do not bargain with half a story." There was a long silence. The fire dropped a coal. But men are slow, listener, and dukes are slowest of all. And grief makes fools of the cleverest of us. And this one had been a fool for 2 years without noticing. He looked at her as though she were a lock he had assumed would open on the first key, and she watched him understand, in that moment, that she was not a lock at all, but a door, and that doors sometimes did not open, no matter who knocked. He sat down. "My son," he said, "is 7 years old. I know your son. Your Grace, I teach him." "You do not teach him. He does not permit himself to be taught. He sits at the desk you set for him, and he stares at the window until you release him. He has not spoken in 14 months. Not to me, not to his nurse, not to anyone, I know. His mother's brother, my late wife's brother, Sir Miles Kettering, has petitioned the Court of Chancery to take him. He argues that a widowed duke in mourning is no fit guardian for a silent child, that the boy requires a mother's household, that he himself is prepared, being married and settled, and of unimpeachable reputation, to provide one. The hearing is set for a fortnight from Tuesday. My solicitor tells me that, unmarried, I will lose the boy. Married to a woman of standing before the hearing, I will not. And I am the woman of standing. You are the woman in this house." She heard it the way one hears a bell struck a shade off true, the deliberate word. And the words he did not say. "Your Grace," she said, "there are unmarried ladies within a day's ride whose fathers would sign a settlement before nightfall. There are widows in this county who would take you tomorrow. Why me?" He looked at her a long moment. "Because they would fail him," he said. "You have not." She had not expected that. She kept her face still. She had trained it, that face, over many years, but something moved under her ribs, some small, warm thing that had gone to sleep so long ago. She had forgotten she owned it, and it stirred and turned over, and she was, for the space of one breath, furious with him for waking it. "I have not made him speak, no. But you opened the north curtains yesterday morning." She stared at him. "They were closed the day she died," he said. "By her order," she said. The light hurt her eyes. After, no one thought to open them again. The boy sits in that room for 1 hour every afternoon. He sat there yesterday afternoon, and he saw the garden for the first time in 14 months, and he did not speak, but he cried, and he had not cried, Miss Bramwell. Not once. Not since the funeral. She had not known he had watched. She had thought herself alone at that window with the child, and the dust and the pale, grieving light. He noticed, she said, and did not realize she had said it aloud until his mouth moved into something that was almost but not quite a smile. "I notice a great deal, Miss Bramwell. It is a habit I acquired young and have not been able to break. And what do you notice about this contract? That it is not a kindness, but this. I am asking you to bind your life to a man you have every reason to dislike, in a house that has not been warm since before you came to it, to raise a child who may never speak to you, in order to defeat a man in a courtroom who wishes only to profit from a boy's silence. I am asking you, because I have no time, and no better instrument." "An instrument, Miss Bramwell?" "You called me an instrument, Your Grace, I heard you." He was quiet. "Yes," he said at last. "I did, I beg your pardon." She had not thought the Duke of Ravenshaw capable of begging pardon of anyone, least of all a governess in a wet hem. She sat with that fact for a moment, the way one sits with an unfamiliar coin, turning it over in one's fingers to see whether it were real. "Then let me tell you," she said, "what I will require." "Require? I am not decoration, Your Grace. I will not enter your house as a duchess. In name, and a governess. In fact, if I take your name, I take the authority that goes with it, over the nursery, over the household, as it touches the boy, over the doors and the curtains and the fires and the meals. Do you understand me? Yes, second. The child's mother is not to be erased. Her portrait stays. Her room stay. Her hymnal on the pianoforte stays. I do not replace her. I do not ask him to call me by her name. I do not permit anyone in this house to require it of him. Is that clear? Yes. Third. Sir Miles Kettering is not the only man in England with a lawyer. I have a father, your grace, who was a barrister before he was a drunkard, and I read every paper he brought home from the age of 11. I will read this contract before I sign it. I will read every paper your solicitor prepares between now and the hearing. If I find a phrase I do not like, I will strike it. If you do not permit me to strike it, I do not sign. Yes. Fourth. She stopped. She had not planned a fourth. She looked at the fire, and she looked at the man across the desk. And she thought, I could ask him for anything now. I could ask him to warm this house. I could ask him to speak to his son. I could ask him not to look at me, ever again, the way he looked at me on the day I came, as though my size were the first fact about me, and my usefulness the second, and I myself somewhere much farther down the list, if I appeared on the list at all. She said, Fourth, you will not pretend in company that you chose me. You will not perform a false affection to satisfy the trustees or the court. If you cannot say a thing truthfully, you will not say it. I would rather be called your bargain than your love, if love is not what I am. Something passed over his face that she could not read. Agreed, he said quietly. All of it. Agreed. Then I will sign. Not tonight. Take it to your room. Bring it back tomorrow. She rose. He rose with her. It was the first time he had risen for her in 6 weeks. And she noticed it, and she was angry with herself for noticing it, and she folded the paper into her sleeve and went to the door. Miss Bramwell? She turned. The curtains, he said. Thank you. She did not answer. She could not. Quite. She went out into the corridor and picked up her candle from the console and walked back the long, cold way to her room in the west wing, and when she was inside with the door closed, she sat down on the edge of the bed with the contract in her lap and did not weep because she did not weep. But she sat there for a great while with her hand pressed to her mouth. And outside the rain continued, patient and unhurrying, the way rain is in a country where one has learned to expect it. She had come to Ravenshaw 6 weeks earlier, on the last of her father's guineas, and the reference of a woman who had pitied her. She had been a governess in 3 houses before this one, and had left each of them for a different variation of the same reason. A mistress who resented her, a master who did not, a family that decided in the end that a large, plain spinster of 30 was not the sort of woman one wished at one's daughter's elbow, being neither ornament nor invisible enough. She had heard in each of those houses the words that were always said behind hands in rooms she had just left. At least the linens will be well kept. No man of rank looks twice at a woman of her size. Poor Miss Bramwell, so capable. She had heard them so often that they had ceased, mostly, to draw blood. She had trained them not to. It was a discipline like any other, the discipline of a horse, taught not to shy, and she had practiced it every day for a decade. And she was, she believed, very good at it. She had believed that until this evening. Now she sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a leaking wing of a great cold house, and she read a marriage contract with her name on it, and she discovered that the discipline had a limit, and that she had struck it, and that beneath the limit was a girl of 19 who had once been told by a man at an assembly that she moved well for one so large, and who had said, "Thank you," and who had gone home and cried for an hour, and then never cried about such a thing again. She read the contract 3 times. It was in its bones honest. He had not tried to hide anything in it. The settlement upon her was more than generous. It was frankly extravagant, and she suspected the solicitor had argued him down and lost. There was a clause providing for her, should he predecease her, that would have kept her comfortable to the end of her days without any need to remarry or return to service. There was a clause acknowledging her authority in the nursery and language. So plain, it could only have come from a man who wanted no misunderstanding. There was, at the end, a line she had not expected. Provided always that the said Honora Elizabeth Bramwell shall not be required, by the Duke or by any member of his household or family, to answer to any name or address, save such as she herself shall choose. She read that line 4 times. She signed the contract in the morning. The wedding was on Thursday. It was performed in the chapel at Ravenshaw by the estate's chaplain, with the Duke's solicitor as one witness, and Mistress Ellery the housekeeper as the other, and a boy of 7 standing in the front pew in a black coat too small at the wrists, holding the hand of his nurse. Honora wore the best gown she owned, which was a dove-gray silk that had been her mother's, and had been let out twice, and she carried no flowers, because she had not thought to ask for any, and no one had thought to offer. The Duke, Alistair. She had learned his given name from the license, and had not so far spoken it aloud, wore black. He looked, she thought, less like a bridegroom than like a man giving evidence. He said his vows plainly. She said hers the same. When it came to the moment of the ring, he took her hand and set the ring upon her finger, and she noticed, because she noticed everything, that the ring fit, that someone had measured, or someone had asked, or he had, at some point taken her hand in his own, and remembered the size of it, and she looked up at him startled, and he looked down at her. And for the space of a breath, the chapel was not cold. Then it was over. They walked back down the aisle, and the boy did not take her hand, and she did not offer it. She had promised herself she would not. She was not his mother. She had said so, in the library, and she would keep faith with what she had said, even to a child of 7, with a locked mouth and a black coat. The wedding breakfast was small and stiff and short. The Duke's aunt, the Lady Wenmore, had come down from Northamptonshire for the ceremony, and she sat opposite Honora at the long table, and looked at her the whole way through the fish course, without appearing to blink. She was a small woman with a mouth like a folded envelope, and Honora, who had been surveyed by many such women in her time, permitted the survey without appearing to notice it, and ate her fish, and answered when spoken to, and did not once reach for a second helping of anything, though she was hungry. Because she had learned young that a woman of her size did not reach for seconds at strange tables, ever, no matter how empty her plate looked. "Ravenshaw tells me," said Lady Wenmore at length, "that you were his son's governess." "I was, madam. And now you are his wife." "I am, madam." "How extraordinary." "Yes, madam." "You do not seem," said Lady Wenmore, "the sort of young woman I should have expected my nephew to choose." Honora set down her fork. "I do not believe, madam, that your nephew chose me for the reasons that would have permitted you to expect me. I believe he chose me for the reasons that make the expectation irrelevant. If you would prefer to be told the truth, I am happy to tell it. If you would prefer to be spared it, I am happy to spare you. I do not mind which." There was a silence. Down the table, the Duke set down his glass very carefully, and did not look up. "I see," said Lady Wenmore. "Thank you, madam." They did not speak again through the remaining courses. When Lady Wenmore rose to go, she paused beside Honora's chair, and said, in a voice pitched for the whole table to hear, "I shall be at the hearing, of course. Miles is my nephew also. I shall be watching with great interest to see how our girl acquits herself," and she went out, "our girl." Honora sat very still. "Our girl." She heard it once. She heard it again. She heard it a third time in the space of a breath. the phrase settling somewhere behind her sternum where the discipline could not quite reach. And she thought, so, that is the shape of it. That is the shape they mean to give it. Not a duchess. A girl. Our girl. A thing brought in on approval to be assessed, and if the assessment goes against her, returned. She rose. She thanked the chaplain. She thanked the solicitor. She walked without hurrying to the library, and she shut the door, and she stood in the middle of the room, and pressed both hands flat against her thighs, and breathed, until the shape of the phrase went out of her chest and into the room, where it could not do her any further harm. The door opened behind her. Honora, she did not turn. I heard her, he said. I should have spoken, you should not. It would have been worse. She would have taken it as evidence. Evidence of what? Of whatever she came here to prove. I do not require your defense, your grace. I require your silence, in company, on the subject of me. That was the fourth condition, do you remember? I remember. Then, keep it. There was a pause. She heard him move a step closer, and then stop, as though he had thought better of it. Alistair, he said. You may call me Alistair in this room, if you would. She turned then. He was standing in the middle of the room in his black coat, with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked, for the first time since she had met him, like a man rather than a portrait. I do not know, she said, that I am ready to. Then. Not yet. Not yet. He nodded. The boy, she said. Where is the boy? With his nurse. Send her away for the afternoon. I will sit with him. He will not. I did not ask what he will or will not. I asked you to send her away. This is the nursery, your grace. I have authority in it. That was the first condition. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he inclined his head, very slightly, and he went out. She sat with the boy that afternoon in the north room, with the curtains open. She did not speak to him. She did not attempt to teach him. She had brought a book she was reading, a translation of Herodotus that had been her father's, one of the few things she had kept, and she sat in the chair, by the window and read it, and turned the pages. And after a while she took out the small piece of bread she had smuggled from the breakfast table in her sleeve. And she set it on the window-sill without looking at him, and she went on reading. After a very long time she heard the small creak of the floorboard by the desk. After a longer time she heard the rustle of the bread being taken. She did not look up. She turned the page. Outside in the garden the last of the rain was coming off the yew hedges in slow bright drops, and a thrush had come down onto the gravel path, and the boy, she could see him from the corner of her eye, was standing at the window with the bread in his hand, watching the thrush. She did not speak, neither did he. But that was all right, listener. Some rooms are not for speaking in, some rooms are for staying in, until the person in them with you learns that you will not this time leave. She stayed. She stayed every afternoon for the next 4 days. She brought the book. She brought the bread. She read, and she did not look at him. And each day he came a little nearer the window. And on the 4th day she looked up and found him standing beside her chair, not touching it, but close enough that his sleeve brushed her arm. And she did not move, and did not speak. And after a minute he went back to the window with the bread. And she turned the page. That evening the Duke came to the nursery. He had not come to the nursery, she gathered from Mistress Ellery, in more than a year. He stood in the doorway in his shirt-sleeves. She had never seen him in his shirt-sleeves. And he looked at the boy asleep in the small bed, with the ribbon from his mother's hymnal wound around his fingers, and he did not go in. He stood in the doorway for a long time, and then he looked at her where she sat by the fire mending a small torn sleeve, and he said, very quietly, "Thank you." For what? For staying near him. He did not. She did not. She could not bear the noise. He learned to be quiet because she asked him to. He has been quiet ever since Honora set down the sleeve. He thinks, she said slowly, that he made her ill. He was 6 years old, he sang, he liked to sing. She was dying and the singing tired her and someone. I do not know who, God help me, I have never known who. Told him his voice had made her worse. He has not sung since. He has not spoken since the funeral. He thinks his voice is a poison, Miss Bramwell. He thinks he sang her to death. She was quiet a long time. Alistair, she said. He looked at her. I will teach him, she said, that his voice is not a poison. I do not know how long it will take, but I will teach him. You have my word. He did not answer at once. He came into the nursery and stood beside her chair, and he looked down at her, and she was aware suddenly and sharply of how tall he was, and how tired, and how much of the world he was holding without ever asking anyone to help him hold it. And she thought very quietly. In a corner of her mind she did not let herself go in too often, this is a lonely man, and I have been lonely also. And loneliness, recognizing loneliness, is not love, but it is not nothing. And I must be careful, Honora, he said. Yes, I did not expect, he said, to care whether you stayed. He went out. She sat by the fire for a long time after that with the mending in her lap, and did not quite move. The days between the wedding and the hearing were 9, and each of them longer than the last. Sir Miles Kettering came calling on the Tuesday, uninvited, and sat in the drawing-room for half an hour, drinking the Duke's brandy and looking at Honora with the careful assessing air of a man pricing a horse he does not intend to buy. He was a handsome man of about 40, with the sort of face that had been made for reassuring widows and dowagers, and he addressed her as Your Grace, with a small ironic pause before the words that told her exactly how he meant them. I understand, he said, that congratulations are in order. They are. A very sudden arrangement. Marriages often are. Sir Miles, some more than others. My poor sister was courted for 3 seasons before Ravenshaw brought himself to the point. One does wonder what has quickened him so. One might, if one had time for wondering. You are cool, Your Grace. I am not, Sir Miles. I am merely not warm to you. There is a difference. If you would like to state your business, I am at your service. If you would prefer to continue admiring the brandy, I shall leave you to it. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I came, he said, to see the boy. The boy is not receiving visitors. I am his uncle. You are the man who has petitioned the Court of Chancery to remove him from the only home he has ever known. He is not required to be pleasant to you before the hearing. He will not be required to be pleasant to you after it. Good afternoon, Sir Miles. He rose slowly. He looked, for the first time, faintly surprised. You are not, he said, quite what I was told to expect. No, Sir Miles, I very rarely am. He bowed, he went. She sat down in the chair he had vacated, and discovered, to her mild irritation, that her hands were shaking. You did that well, said the Duke, from the doorway. She had not heard him come in. How long had you been standing there? Long enough. He is patient, that man. He is patient in a way that makes me uneasy. He did not come here to see the boy. He came here to see you. He wanted to know what he was fighting. And now he knows. Now he knows that whatever else you may be, you are not stupid, and you are not easily frightened. Which will make him more careful. Which will make him more dangerous. Honora? Yes, my solicitor came this morning, with news I have not yet told you. Miles has produced a letter. a letter said to be written by my late wife, in the last months of her illness, expressing her wish that in the event of her death, her brother should be principal guardian of her son, on the grounds that her husband was, I am quoting, cold, distant, and unfit to raise a child alone. She stared at him. Is the letter genuine? I do not know. My solicitor believes it to be forged. He cannot yet prove it. Miles has produced 2 witnesses to its writing, her maid and a clergyman who attended her at the end. Both are prepared to swear. Bought, almost certainly, but swearing all the same. She was quiet for a moment. She had spent a great many hours in her father's small legal library as a girl, sitting on the rug reading briefs. She had no business reading, and she remembered a case in a county over in which a maid had sworn to a document and been discovered by the persistent question of a young barrister to have been unable to read the document she claimed to have witnessed. The maid, she said, can she read? He looked at her. I do not know. Find out. Quietly. If she cannot read, she cannot have witnessed the writing of a letter. She can only have witnessed her mistress moving a pen. And a dying woman moves a pen, for many reasons, most of them dictated by whoever is standing behind the bed. He was staring at her. Honora, my father was a barrister before he was a drunkard, Your Grace. I told you. I read every paper he brought home. Find out whether the maid can read, and whether the clergyman was in debt at the time of the alleged writing. Men who are bought are usually bought because they are in need. He came across the room and stood in front of her chair, and he took her hand, took it quite plainly, without asking, the way one takes a hand. One has forgotten, one is not entitled to. And he held it a moment. And then he said, very low, I did not marry you for this. You married me for a hearing. I married you for the boy. But I did not know, Honora. I did not know that you, Alistair, she said. He stopped. Go and speak to your solicitor, she said. I will speak to the maid. You will not speak to the maid. It will look like tampering. I will not speak to the maid. I will speak to Mistress Ellery, who will speak to the housekeeper at the Kettering house, whose sister is the cook here, and who owes Mistress Ellery a favor from before I was born. Nothing will look like anything. Go. He went. She sat with her hand where he had left it, and looked at it as though it belonged to someone else. The news came back on the Thursday. The maid could not read. The clergyman had lost £300 at whist in July, and had been visited in August by a gentleman of Sir Miles's acquaintance, who had settled the debt for him without a receipt. Neither fact would be admissible unless it could be drawn out under oath. Both facts, drawn out under oath, would collapse the letter and, with it, a petition. The Duke's solicitor was, when Honora explained this to him, silent for a long moment. Your Grace, he said at last, you are wasted in a nursery. I am not wasted anywhere, Mr. Halloway. I am precisely where I intend to be. Prepare your cross-examination. That was the Thursday. On the Friday, Lady Wenmore returned to Ravenshaw. She came without warning, and with 3 trunks and a maid, and she installed herself in the yellow bedroom without asking. And she came down to dinner in a gown Honora recognized as being 3 seasons old but very fine. And she sat opposite Honora at the long table for the second time, and looked at her for the entire fish course without appearing to blink. I have been thinking, she said over the removes, about our girl. Have you, madam? I have. I have been thinking that it will not do. You see, for the hearing, a woman of your presentation will attract remark. The Court of Chancery is a small room, our girl, and everyone in it looks at everyone else, and the judge will look at you, and he will draw conclusions, and the conclusions will not be to Ravenshaw's benefit. I have therefore taken it upon myself to bring my own modiste from town. She will attend you tomorrow. She will do what can be done." Honora set down her fork. "Madam," she said, "you are very kind. I will not require your modiste. Our girl." "You will not," said Honora quite calmly. "Call me that again. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not at the hearing. Not madam, ever. My name is Honora. If you find that too intimate for your comfort, you may address me as your grace, which is what I am. I am not your girl. I have never been your girl. I will not be your girl for the convenience of a judge who has not yet met me and does not yet know that I intend, when he does meet me, to be entirely myself. Is that understood?" There was a very long silence. "Ravenshaw," said Lady Wenmore without looking away from Honora, "your wife is impertinent." "My wife," said the Duke from the head of the table, "is correct." Lady Wenmore turned her head slowly. "I beg your pardon, you heard me, aunt. My wife is correct. You will not address her as our girl. You will not bring your modiste. You will not attend the hearing. You are welcome at Ravenshaw as my aunt for as long as you wish to remain in that character, while you are not welcome at Ravenshaw as a spy for Sir Miles Kettering, which is what you have been since you arrived, and which I have known you to be since the wedding breakfast, and which I have permitted to continue only because my wife requested that I permit it, being of the view that she preferred to know where you were rather than where you were not. That view no longer holds. You may go up in the morning. Halloway will arrange the carriage." Lady Wenmore had gone very white. "Alistair," she said, "you cannot—" "I can, I have. Good night, aunt." She rose. She looked at Honora once, very briefly, with an expression that was not quite hatred, but was in the same family as hatred, and shared its bones. Then she went out. Honora sat with her hands in her lap. "You have made an enemy," she said. "I have made her irrelevant." "It is not the same thing, Honora. Yes, you wished me to be silent in company on the subject of you. I have been. Tonight was not the subject of you. Tonight was the subject of her. I hope you will permit the distinction." She looked at him a long moment. "I permit it," she said. He almost smiled. The hearing was on the Tuesday. She had not slept the night before. She had lain in the great bed in the great cold room that she had since the wedding, occupied alone, the Duke sleeping in his own chamber across the corridor as they had, without discussion, agreed he would, and she had listened to the house settle and the rain begin again, and the small brown owl in the beech tree call 3 times. And she had thought about the boy, and she had thought about the letter, and she had thought, once, briefly and without permission, about the Duke's hand on hers in the drawing-room, and then she had thought about the boy again. Deliberately, until the thought of the hand went away. She had risen at 5. She had dressed in her second-best gown, which was the dark green wool she had brought from Yorkshire, and she had done her own hair. Plainly, in the plait she had worn every day since she was 15. She had gone to the nursery. The boy was awake. He was sitting up in bed with a ribbon from his mother's hymnal wound around his fingers. She had sat on the edge of the bed. Today she had said, "I am going to a room in London, where a man will decide where you are to live. He will ask me questions, and I will answer them. He may ask you a question. You do not have to answer him. You have never had to answer anyone, and you do not have to answer him. But if you should wish to, if, at any moment, you should wish to, you may. Your voice is not a poison. It was never a poison. Whoever told you, it was told you a lie, and I will not have you carry it any longer. Do you understand me?" He had looked at her. He had not spoken. He had looked at her. Then, very slowly, he had reached out with the hand that held the ribbon, and he had laid the ribbon in her palm, and he had closed her fingers around it. And he had leaned forward, and he had pressed his forehead, briefly, against her shoulder, and he had let go, and lain back down, and closed his eyes. She had sat with the ribbon for a long time, then she had gone downstairs. The courtroom was not large. It was on the first floor of a building off Chancery Lane, and it smelt of old paper and coal, and the peculiar dust of legal life. Sir Miles was already there when she and the Duke arrived, dressed in dark blue, and looking, she thought, less handsome than he had at Ravenshaw, as though the light in London did not flatter him. His two witnesses sat behind him, a small woman with red hands who did not raise her eyes, and a thin clergyman with a face like a boiled potato. Lady Wenmore was there also. She had, of course, come. She sat behind Sir Miles with her mouth folded, and did not look at Honora. The judge was an old man with kind eyes, and a habit of tapping his pen against his lip when he was listening. And he listened that morning, for a great while. He listened to Sir Miles's counsel lay out the case. He listened to the letter read aloud in a clear, steady voice. My dear brother, in the event of my death, I beg you to consider yourself the principal guardian of my son, for his father is a cold man, and I fear for the child in his hands. He listened to the maid confirm, in a small, frightened voice, that she had witnessed the writing of the letter. He listened to the clergyman confirm the same. Then he listened to Mr. Halloway. Mistress Adkins, said Mr. Halloway very gently, to the maid, would you be so good as to read to the court the first line of the letter you have just heard, read aloud? There was a silence. Aye, said the maid. Read it, Mistress Adkins, just the first line. The silence stretched. I cannot, sir. You cannot see it clearly. Shall I bring it closer? I cannot read it, sir. I cannot read. The silence in the courtroom was of a particular quality. Honora had heard that quality once before, in her father's chambers, on the day a witness had broken. She had been 11. Then. She had never forgotten it. You did not witness the writing of this letter, Mistress Adkins? You witnessed your mistress moving a pen. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Who was in the room when she moved the pen? The maid looked at Sir Miles. She looked at the judge. She looked at her red hands. Sir Miles, sir, and the doctor. Sir Miles was in the room. Yes, sir. Did Sir Miles speak to your mistress while she moved the pen? He read to her, sir. From the letter. He read the letter to her while she moved the pen across it. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mistress Adkins. That will be all. The clergyman took less time. Halloway did not need to ask him whether he could read. He needed only to ask him about a debt at whist in the July of the previous year. And the clergyman went the color of his own collar, and the judge tapped his pen once against his lip. And the matter was, effectively, done. Noun. But that was not the moment Honora remembered afterwards. The moment she remembered afterwards was when the judge, having heard the counsel for the Duke, turned to Honora herself in the small witness chair and said, Your Grace, you have been in this household how long? 6 weeks, my lord? Before my marriage, 10 days since. You are the boy's stepmother. I am. He is silent, I understand. He is. Why, she had prepared many answers. She used none of them. Because someone told him, she said, that his singing made his mother ill. He was 6 years old, my lord. He believed them. He has not spoken since her funeral. He believes his voice is a poison. It is not. He is beginning, I think, to understand that it is not. He gave me his mother's ribbon this morning. I have it in my pocket. It is the first thing he has given anyone in 14 months. The judge was quiet a moment. Your Grace, he said, may I ask you a question that is not? strictly, before this court. You may, my lord. Why did you marry the Duke of Ravenshaw? She heard the courtroom go very still. She heard, behind her. She looked at the judge. Because he asked me, my lord. And because, when he asked me, he told me the truth. And because I have not, in 10 years of being a governess in other people's houses, been told the truth by any man of rank. And it seemed to me that a man who would tell me the truth about a bargain would perhaps in time tell me the truth about other things also. And because there is a child in his house who has not spoken for a year, and because, my lord, if I may, because I was asked, I have not often been asked. I found, when I was asked, that I wished to say yes. The judge tapped his pen against his lip. Thank you, your grace. Thank you, my lord. He gave judgment before the noon bell. The petition was dismissed. The letter was set aside as of no evidentiary value. Pacture. The clergyman was referred in a dry aside to his bishop. Sir Miles was ordered to pay costs. Lady Wenmore rose without looking at anyone, and walked out of the courtroom. And Honora did not see her again for a great many years. And when she did see her, at a garden party in the country, Lady Wenmore turned her head aside, and Honora, who had by then quite forgotten the sound of the phrase, "our girl," did not turn her own. They rode back to Ravenshaw in silence. The Duke sat opposite her in the carriage, and looked out of the window for a long time, and then he looked at her, and then he looked out of the window again. "Honora," he said, "when you told the judge, when you said, I said what was true, Alistair, not more, not less. If you would prefer I had said less, I beg your pardon. I would prefer nothing less. That is my difficulty." She looked at him. He was very pale. He was looking at her as though she were a room. He had walked past every day of his life, and had only now, this morning, thought to enter. "Honora," he said, "I have been a fool. I have been a fool since the day I met you. I looked at you across that library 6 weeks ago, and I decided, in the way that men of my station decide such things, what you were, a governess, a large plain governess, who would do for a bargain because no one else would. That is what I decided. That is what I loathed in myself, the moment I decided it, and what I loathed in you for making me decide it, and what I have loathed every hour since, because every hour since you have shown me a woman I did not know how to see, and I did not know how to unsee the woman I had first decided you were, and I did not know how to ask your pardon without ceasing, in the same breath, to have any right to be near you at all. Do you understand me? I understand you. I do not know how to say what I mean to say to you now, Honora, because I have not said such things to anyone in 8 years, and I did not say them well then, and I have not improved. But I will try. I will try in the library at Ravenshaw. Not here, not in a carriage. In the room where you set your terms. Will you permit me that?" She could not speak. Quite. She nodded. He did not touch her. He looked at her a moment longer, and then he looked out of the window again. And the carriage rolled on through the wet, green country, toward the house she had, without noticing, come to think of as home. The library at Ravenshaw was warm that evening. Someone had, without being told, built the fire high. The curtains were drawn against the dark, and the lamp on the desk was lit, and the paper, the marriage contract, still lying where it had been signed, had been folded and set to one side. She stood in the middle of the room in her green wool, and he stood in front of her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Honora Alistair, I love my first wife," he said. "You should know that. I loved her for 11 years. She died, and I stopped being able to feel very much of anything, and I decided that this was proper, that a widower should be cold, that a duke should be cold, that a father should be cold, because feeling, in my experience, had cost me more than I could afford to lose again. I built a house of that decision. You walked into it. You opened the curtains. You gave the boy his voice back. You told a courtroom the truth. You set terms with me on the first night, and you have kept every one of them, and I have kept none of mine. Because the fourth condition was, that I should not pretend in company to have chosen you for love. And Honora, I did not choose you for love. But I love you now. I love you now, and I have loved you, I think, since the afternoon you opened the north curtains, and I did not know it, and I did not deserve to know it. And I am telling you now because you asked me on the first night not to pretend, and I will not, tonight or ever, pretend to you about anything again. She stood very still. She said, "Do not say it if it is only gratitude." It is not gratitude. Gratitude, I have felt for a fortnight. This is something else. This is the thing I did not know I had lost until you gave it back to me. Please. Please what? Please. Believe me. She looked at him. She had trained her face for many years. She let the training go. She let it fall from her the way one lets a shawl fall from one's shoulders in a warm room. And she stood in the light of the lamp in her green wool with her plait undone at the temple and her eyes wet, and she said, "I believe you. God help us both. Alistair, I believe you." He crossed the room. He did not quite know what to do with his hands when he reached her, and she saw it, and she took them. Took both of them plainly the way he had taken hers in the drawing-room a week before. And she set them at her waist, and she said, "Here. They go here. They have gone here in my imagination for 4 days, and I would prefer them to go here, in fact." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. It was a low, surprised, unpracticed sound, and she thought, "I shall want to hear that again. I shall want to hear that for a great many years." He kissed her. It was clumsy and true. It was not the kiss of a duke. It was the kiss of a man who had not kissed anyone for a long time and who was doing his best, and she found that she preferred it, quite decidedly, to any of the smooth, accomplished kisses she had read about in books she had, in her spinsterhood, been embarrassed to be caught reading. When he lifted his head, he said, "You are beautiful. Alistair, I am telling you the truth. I am telling you the truth, as I promised. You are beautiful. I have thought so since the second week. I did not permit myself to think it before then, because I was still pretending I loathed you. And I did not permit myself to say it after, because I did not think I had earned the right. I am telling you now. I would prefer you to believe me, but if you do not believe me tonight, I will tell you again tomorrow and the day after and every morning, until the fact becomes as ordinary to you as the weather. Do you understand me?" She could not speak. She nodded. They sat down together on the small sofa by the fire, and she leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her. And neither of them said anything for a great while, and outside the rain, which had begun again at some point without either of them noticing, fell on the roof of Ravenshaw with a soft, steady sound. And somewhere in the house a small brown owl called from the beech tree, and the fire, for the first time in 2 years, was high. 6 months later, there was a garden at Ravenshaw, where there had, before, been only lawn. Honora had ordered it planted in the autumn, a herb garden mostly, because roses she found sentimental and herbs she found useful. Though she had permitted one small bed of pinks along the south wall, because Alistair had asked quietly whether she would consider it, and she had discovered that when Alistair asked her quietly for a thing she could, in general, be persuaded to consider it. The boy, his name was Thomas. She had taken to calling him Thomas 6 weeks after the hearing. Having asked his permission first, was in the garden most afternoons, following the gardener about with a small trowel and a very serious expression, and he was speaking now in short, careful sentences, and once in the 2nd month he had sung. He had sung a hymn his mother had taught him. He had sung it in the drawing-room after supper with his hand in Honora's, and Alistair had stood in the doorway and had not come in, because he had known, and Honora had known, that this song was not for him. It was for the woman whose portrait still hung above the fireplace in the north room, and whose hymnal still lay open on the pianoforte, and whose name Thomas said now quite naturally when he spoke of his mother. Honora had never asked him to call her mother. She had said, on the first night, that she would not. And she had kept faith with what she had said. He called her Nora. He had called her Nora since the morning of the hearing, when he had given her the ribbon. She did not know when he had chosen the name. She had not asked. It was his to give, and hers to keep, and it was, she thought, the finest name she had ever been called by anyone. There was an evening in the spring when Alistair came into the herb garden at dusk and found her kneeling by the sage, and he stood watching her for a moment, and she looked up and saw him watching, and she said, "You are noticing me. I am always noticing you." "I know. I have grown accustomed to it. I recommend it as a habit." He laughed, the low, unpracticed laugh she had by now heard often enough that it was no longer a surprise, and he came and sat down beside her on the low stone, and he said, "Nora, yes. Do you remember the first night in the library? When you asked me why I remember. I told you it was because you had not failed him. I told you it was because you opened the curtains. It was true. It was not the whole truth. I did not know the whole truth then. I know it now. Will you have it? Yes. It was because you asked me a question." She looked at him. "When you asked me, on the first night, to tell you the truth in full, no one had asked me that in 8 years. Everyone in this house had learned to ask me only what I wished to answer. You asked me what I did not wish to answer, and you asked it plainly, and you waited for the answer. And when the answer came, you did not flatter it or flinch from it. You asked me a question, Nora. That was what shifted it. Not the curtains. Not the boy. The question. I had been a man who was not asked questions, and you asked one. And I remembered, in the answering of it, that I had once been a man who could be asked. That was what you gave me. That is what you have given me every day since. I wanted you to know." She was quiet a long time. "Alistair," she said. "Yes." "I am going to weep, and I would prefer to weep against your shoulder rather than into the sage. If you would permit it, I would permit it." She wept against his shoulder in the herb garden at dusk, and he held her, and above them the first stars were coming out over Ravenshaw, and in the house behind them, a boy of 7 was practicing his scales quite badly, on the pianoforte his mother had once played, and the sound of it came out through the open window across the lawn, and it was not, Honora thought, a poison. It had never been a poison. It was only a small voice finding its way back into a house that had at last remembered how to hear it. She had come to Ravenshaw, on the last of her father's guineas, in a wet hem, with a candle she had lit herself. She had been called a great many things in the houses she had passed through: capable, useful, at least the linens will be well kept. No man of rank looks twice at a woman of her size, our girl. She,